The history of Europe is full of contrasts, always restless for change, but wanting an ordered society and standards to live by, striving more and more for humanitarian ideals, yet developing power structures which undermine humanity, deeply mystical, but also calculating and practical. Throughout its history, Europe has shown an unlimited capacity, both to create and destroy. After 2 world wars had brought Europe to the edge of a precipice, Europeans made a fresh attempt to come together and combine their strength. On the 25th of March 1957, the Treaties of Rome were signed. 3 decades have passed since then, but the history of men's efforts to unite Europe goes back over 2,000 years. The spirit of restlessness, which has been such a driving force in European history, has left its mark on the continent. Its traces are still seen in our everyday lives today. The birth of the Western world. The earliest cultural impulses that Europe felt emerged from the darkness of the past. The first classical forms developed in Greece, temples like the Parthenon in Athens reflecting a higher concept of the world, or sculptures whose beauty set unforgettable standards for European art. The first of the great European civilizations flourished for only a short period, but left a continuing cultural heritage to the Western world in art, politics, and philosophy. In Delphi stands the temple of Apollo, the god of prophecy, of philosophy, and of poetry. A new spiritual and intellectual life opened up in Europe. It was Alexander the Great, through his conquests, who spread this Greek civilization to the ancient world. Alexander's empire did not last for long, but its spirit shone forth and lit the way forward for Europe. Roman Europe. Even today, Rome is full of buildings which remind us of its glittering history. The Colosseum, where thousands of people gathered to watch lavish, often cruel spectacles. The Stadium, where the Romans held their famous chariot races. The Forum, Rome's marketplace and the center of its empire. An empire which spread over almost the whole of Europe, and for the first time in its history gave the continent a political structure. The Roman legions which conquered Europe brought universal Roman law and their language, Latin, a unifying link which laid the foundations for later Europe-wide developments like the spread of Christianity and the Age of Enlightenment. The Romans were also road builders, and their roads have remained lifelines of European civilization ever since. Even today you can find traces of Roman civilization throughout Europe. Provence in France overflows with examples of the Roman way of life, unforgotten to this day. Porta Nigra in the German town of Trier, once the largest Roman town north of the Alps. Port de Mars in Reims, in northern France. The remains of the Roman city wall in London, once a Roman military camp. Up to Hadrian's Wall on the borders of England and Scotland. All these are the marks of a society which embraced much of Europe within one civilization. The spread of Christianity. With the beginning of the Middle Ages, monasticism became the new torchbearer of European unity. In Rome, the propagation of Christianity had quickly become linked with the interests of political power. But in the relative poverty of the Irish monasteries, it became a purely spiritual mission, fired by a religious conviction alone. Travelling first to Scotland and England, and then to the continent to spread the word, as they believed they were called to do, the monks brought with them biblical manuscripts like the Book of Kells, which were to become part of the collective experience of much of Europe. In the Crusades, the papacy reinforced its links with secular power. And as before, it was monasticism which tried to purge Christianity of its secular taint. This time, the impetus came from Italy, and as previously, the movement called for the practice of intense spirituality. Groups spread the message of Francis of Assisi all over the world. Even today, St. Francis is revered by all Christians. Thanks to the efforts of the monks, Europe had found a new basis for understanding. It had become Christian. The Empire of Charlemagne. The end of the 8th century saw a new political order emerge from the chaos of transition. Charlemagne was anointed king at Saint-Denis in France, held court at Aachen in Germany, and was crowned emperor in Rome. During his reign, the ideas of universality and European unity revived, partly because the empire was a single legislative area, and partly because posts and honors were allocated centrally. Even by today's standards, Charlemagne is a striking example of what Europe is and could be. The French, the Belgians, and the Germans look to him for their conception of the European idea, and revere him as one of their own people. His throne is in Aachen. He left Europe with a vision of a common interest which could transcend individual interests, a vision which was to lead like an unbroken thread throughout history. Charlemagne's body is also buried in Aachen, in a golden shrine, at the same time a memorial and a challenge. The Age of Nations. However, for several hundred years, the intellectual unity of Europe was to stand in direct contrast to the divisive political trends of the time, the development of the self-contained nation-state. Napoleon, the first modern politician of our times, became the deliverer of France and the ruler of Europe. Napoleon marked a watershed in European history. The reason is not so much his victories in battle, but the fact that he made a deliberate effort to involve the mass of the people in his visions and ambitions. With the help of the first rank-and-file armies in the world, he won the Battle of Moscow in 1812, but he lost the war, and his empire as well. His concept of unity was military, but in identifying government with the will of the mass, he ushered in a new period of politics. The beginnings of mass society. The desire to discover the secrets of nature was one of the hallmarks of the Enlightenment. In 1765, this spirit of inquiry led to the invention of the steam engine by the Scotsman James Watt. In England, you can still see the houses that were then built for the workers. Their uniformity is a reflection of new mechanized production methods brought about by the steam engine. The European economic order was not ready for such a radical change. The traditional social system which offered satisfaction and security to the individual was destroyed in the name of progress, and the masses of the French Revolution became the proletariat of the industrial era. The working class soon began to stand up for itself. Here in Manchester and in the same way across the Channel in France and later in Germany, Europe had found a new sense of solidarity in the resistance of the poorest to those in authority. Internationalism was to become the aim of progress. Friedrich Engels, son of a German factory owner whose home can still be seen in Wuppertal, became a spokesman for the working class in England. He described their plight in a book which caused a sensation all over Europe. In London in 1848, he edited The Communist Manifesto with Karl Marx. In Manchester, Marx wrote Das Kapital, the book which fueled the ideological divide of the modern world. Marx left his mark on the social conscience of Europe, but his vision did not lead to peace. Mass industrial society opened up the way to mass industrialized war. 600,000 men died at Verdun in the First World War, and a total of 10 millions in the 4 years that the war lasted. The land around Fort Douaumont is still barren. In the Second World War, 28 million combatants lost their lives. 25 million civilians were killed in Europe. 6 million Jews were exterminated in concentration camps. The experience of 20 centuries had led Europeans not to a better life, but to a precipice with the promise and achievement only of death. There is now the chance to evolve common solutions to Europe's common problems in fields like research and technology and the protection of the environment. Indeed, today, these problems know no national frontiers and can only be tackled together. Europe is a political idea, but not an abstract ideal. Its history is a story of 20 centuries of unrest and change, of people looking for a structure in society and standards by which to live. It stands for the unflagging desire to find new ways of providing freedom and security for its inhabitants. Its varying traditions of democracy have now merged in the hope and the opportunity of a European Parliament. The dynamic of 20 centuries has received new expression.